do the Voices of VR podcast, and we're continuing on in our series of celebrating the 15th anniversary of DocLab and having a number of different conversations with both the artists that were featured at this year's festival as well as previous festivals. And so today we have Roel. Roel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So my name is Roel Wouters, and I'm founding partner and also of Moniker. And we are like a small studio, tight-knit studio, who do all kinds of projects that somehow relate to how humans and people relate to technology and how that affects our life. The social effects of technology, we also say sometimes. So we're always very interested in technology, but also very curious about what weird side effects those could have to our lives and respond to that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and maybe you could give a bit more context as to your background and your journey into making this type of interactive and immersive work.
So I was educated in the late 90s in The Hague, in the Royal Academy of Art. And then I did a master in the Sandberg Institute. There I studied media with Mieke Gerritsen and Rob Schreuder. And there I learned, I got to know Luna, who's my basically the other co-founder of Moniker and partner. And then we started with the 3 people. We started Moniker. But then first I learned to get to know Luna. We did lots of experiments in lots of performances, and it was the early days of that was called new media back then, and we were very much excited about all the democratization of knowledge and like the optimistic vibe of what technology could bring us and how that would sort of emancipate humanity at the time. How different did it turn all out? But
yeah, and so because this is the 15th anniversary of DocLab, I'm curious, like, when was your first encounter with the IDFA DocLab in that community then?
I don't really know, but it has been a very long time. We have been doing so many things, but I think the first time we encountered this was when we made this project called Do Not Touch. And it was like a web-based music video where the position of your mouse cursor of all the viewers was recorded while watching. And you got all kinds of questions asked, like follow a specific line or do touch something or not, like all kinds of questions while looking at it. And then your mouse cursor was recorded into the video itself, and then cumulative over time, like thousands and thousands of cursors would create like certain patterns and swarms behavior. And it dealt a little bit about the idea that like it was 2013, so that's not that long ago. Yeah. Anyway, it was like on the verge when we're starting as touch as our main, touch as our main computer input device, basically. And I think at that time we were also nominated for or we just in the exhibition, I don't know exactly. And then afterwards we did a lot of other things as well with them. Yeah.
Yeah, when I attended DocLab in 2018, I was really struck by the kind of like my conceptions of what documentary was and what that meant, versus the type of work that I was seeing there that I kind of associated with more the immersive storytelling or something that was, I don't know, I guess in my own mind, I thought of it different than documentary. And so how do you see your work as being kind of like, it sounds like these, almost like these interactive web experiments, or to see these group dynamics that you're able to pull forth, and how you see that is connected to the form of documentary?
Yeah, I think I think that's the super nice thing. It also, like similar as you, it really made me think differently about what documentary is basically. But the idea that somehow you capture something that is not that is out there in the world, and it's not a narrative that is basically author driven and completely come from like a genius mind, but somehow exposes something like how people relate to each other or how people move into the world or deal with the world. I think that is what is central. And then often new technology, it's often not so visible what it actually captures, and it's often quite different from what it promised and what it actually does. And I think that is what DocLab does very well, is somehow recognizing that often new technology are new ways of camera, sort of new cameras, and therefore can document behavior in a very specific or new way. And they also, I think they're also secretly, they're also very willing to stress the definitions all the time, which is of course like that's why it's a laboratorium, you could say. They're really curious about like all this kind of new possibilities of technology and what it, yeah.
Yeah, and so the do not touch, it looks like in the notes that I was passed along by some of the researchers at DocLab, it was 2016. There's also a click, a browser-based game that's also DocLab. Was that also at the same time, the same year, or is that something?
No, it was later. It was at least a year later. Yeah, and that is maybe less documentary, although it's basically capturing users' behavior. So let's say the browser has like all kinds of called browser events. It's basically things that the browser can know at the moment you do it. So of course the position of your mouse screen, but also the size of your screen, and also the browser you're using, the amount of computational processors you have. And there's like virtually not endless list, but there's like about, let's say, 50 kind of things that you can measure in the browser. Basically what the person on the other end all sort of exposes at the moment he goes to a website. And in this click project, we basically make all these things achievements. So the goal is to basically expose all the possible browser events that you can possibly trigger with your behavior. And so we do that on the one hand, and on the other hand, we also try to, let's say, interpret or attempt to interpret, sometimes a bit wild guess, what that behavior could somehow mean in the reality. So for example, if you visit the website at a specific time, the website would respond, that's awkward, it's like 8 a.m. your time zone, shouldn't you be at work? This is a very simple interpretation of what you might do, but often, or we expose like relatively to other people, you're way more in the left upper corner of your screen. Why is that? Is there maybe like, whatever? So then we try to make some conclusions. We try to build, like, not only expose the bare facts, but also somehow interpret that. And therefore it becomes very personal, and it feels as if you are really like watched closely. And therefore, so that's what that project does. So it's also a bit documentary, but that's also, you could say, very much an author narrative somehow.
Yeah, and the next piece was the Tonite.dance, which I think I actually saw the world premiere at the Google I/O in 2017. I was there and got to see, be one of the folks that got to. What I remember was that I don't know if it was on WebXR, WebVR, if it was web-based, but there was like you kind of go into this world and it's like a music video, but you are recording your movements and your embodied movements. And then I guess it was probably in the Vive then, because I was using the Vive wands, and then it was tracking how I was moving, but then recording it. So then I was kind of seeing different aspects of my own embodied playback as I was going through this kind of music video piece. So maybe you could talk a bit about, the journey of working on that piece, because that was quite an innovative piece that, was kind of playing with embodiment and recording and looping embodiment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think when we were invited by Google to make something with their newest technology at the time, that was WebXR or WebVR, I don't know anymore. I think WebXR. We're a bit skeptical about VR maybe, because it's so much like, especially I think if you hold, to me, maybe the most fantastic moment in the Vive was the moment that I first put on the glasses and I saw the controller and I picked it up with my hands, but I was not able to see my own hands, and that it just was so real. I think it never got any better than that. And I think often VR projects somehow really thrive on that sensation, basically. And it's very difficult to make something that's bigger than that. But then we realized, but then of course we were also very curious to investigate the medium, and then we realized that the body itself, like everything, is basically as real as you possibly like it to be, except for your body. That's the only thing that somehow really stays behind. Also, if you see a photo of somebody who's in VR, it's basically only a body, also because his eyes are shut off, and you're very unaware of your body, it also becomes that you somehow don't really look at your posture anymore. You really become like a mess, a body mess. And the weird thing is that it's not visible. If you look down in VR, you don't really see your body. And we thought that somehow was very typical and very defining of that medium at the time. And then we thought, okay, we just did, like, that was very generous of Google. They allowed us to really play with that. Really take some time to really play with that notion, do all kinds of experiments, and in the end, we came up with an idea of a music video, which was the result of like lots of iterative play. And I did that together with Jonathan Puckey, like also our co-founder of Moniker.
Yeah, it's a great piece, and it's certainly cutting edge for using the WebVR at the time. I don't know if it was WebVR or WebXR.
Yeah.
But then I saw a brief video of the red follows yellow follows blue follows red, where it seemed like you were, I don't know if the actual piece that was at DocLab, if it was just a series of these different performances where you put people in these different colors and then kind of give different instructions, and then you see the different emergent behavior, which I imagine as I'm watching it from the top down, I get a whole experience of what is happening in the group dynamics, but to be a part of it, I imagine would be quite a different experience. And so maybe you could give a bit more context as to that piece.
Yeah. We did it in DocLab. We did a first experiment, so that was only the first test, and then later we also did it once in a big in Austria in a contemporary music festival. It was called. I would love to say the name now. Anyway, maybe I come to it later. So there's like 3 groups of people. They all get instructions on their head. And they are instructions like, if you have this red, for example, a red suit on, you are very much attracted to all the other red people that are in the place, and therefore automatically it becomes one bulb. And then we give another instruction, say, like, as a group, you're now completely attracted to the yellow group that similarly at the same time was like somewhere followed, but you're repulsed by the blue group, and then automatically, and they all got like different instructions, like similarly designed to somehow respond to each other, and therefore you got all kinds of emergent behavior that was not per se descripted in the instructions, but as a result of the behavior, basically. And then we did like lots of different kind of tests on how can we come up with instructions that are both not predictable in the outcome and also not descriptive in what to do, but somehow would create some sort of emergent behavior. And maybe another interesting thing is that we were a bit insecure about, like, when the audience would come in, if they would somehow accept us putting these thoughts in their brains, and like we were a bit worried that people maybe say, like, yeah, why would I do that, or what is me? But and there were, especially in the moment we did it for the contemporary music, were quite a bit of older people, but then afterwards they were like super enthusiastic in terms, they said, like, it was as if I was in if I was on drugs in a music festival, because I just felt I became one with my group, and I was allowed to leave control. Control was completely gone. I could just emerge in this wholesome experience where we together became one. And I think that was very funny, because we never expected that as a result. We thought it was way more critical about the individual decision making and something like on that territory, but it was way more about collective in the end, as a collective experience. And that was beautiful and completely unexpectedly positive as well.
Yeah, that type of emergent flocking behaviors and the kind of complexity, chaos that happens from these simple instructions that have all these group dynamics. I could see how that would be, you don't have a lot of opportunities to have that type of interaction, to be immersed in a field like that. So that looks pretty cool.
Yeah, what we also did there was that we also did purpose, because normally we really like our audience to be completely, let's say, in control of let's say we always try to be super explicit and precise in the instructions so they fully understand and also have basically a moment to rationalize it and then engage or not. But we also in this work we purposely did like some instructions that we knew that was not easy to completely directly commit to because they were just too complex. For example, you had to make a split decision on where to go left or right depending on the specific construction around you, and that also created beautiful side effects that we also really could not predict, and also in a computer simulation would probably look completely different. And I think that was also, but it's a bit nerdy, but we really enjoyed that aspect as well, that you somehow use not only the algorithmic flocking behavior, but also somehow the human intuition of some became visible.
Yeah, and you've, as a studio, Moniker, you've been quite prolific actually in terms of all the different pieces you've had at DocLab over the years. That piece was in 2018, and then in 2020 you had another piece called Come Shave, which was sort of like you had two pieces. Oh, so what were the pieces that you had there? And that
I didn't say two. I mean, yes, I forgot about that one, but it's true. We did another one.
Oh yeah. So Come Shave, it seemed like that was kind of like you were just shaving something. Maybe you could explain what that piece was and how that kind of fit into this overarching larger body of work of these experiments that you're doing.
That's a good question. I also okay. It was made together with Alexandra Barankovic and Jay Paris, and together with them, I missed the train. I was in Germany. I missed the train and ended up in Berlin, and I ended up sleeping at their place. And then in the night, we were having these conversations about gaming, and we somehow observed that it was so strange that normally when you're in a game, basically your body and the game character is always in the center of the world, and the game world around him or her is always there to exploit. Let's say Mario just jumps to eat a mushroom and it gets better. So there's always the narrative of you are basically the center of the world, and somehow Minecraft is of course a very good example. There's always this idea that the world is there for you most of the time. And you grow by somehow exploiting it. Okay, I said it now a few times. And then we thought, is that a view on the world that we somehow promote because that's how the world works? Or is it also maybe possible to come up with something completely different where you maybe exploit your own body in order to progress in a game? That was just a thought. And then we thought of sort of very gore kind of game where you can chop off your arm and somehow use that to throw your head through a hole. We had like all kinds of sort of gory fantasies then, and that led to like and then I think at that stage it's still related quite well to, for example, Dance Tonight, where it's really also about the body in a different way, and also the question of what does the digital body means. But then and then we did all kinds of workshops about how is it possible to exploit your body in order to do something. And then one of the things that came out of it, that was just like a very tiny side project, was like the idea that you could somehow together shave, that would somehow could be like but it actually was like a super small idea, but that somehow we thought it was worthwhile to execute and see if that would work in a social context. And that's what we did. Yeah. So more about that, I don't really know what to say about it, but yeah.
Okay,
so, but it's a result of, let's say, an ongoing research project that's called Figurable, and that really discusses the body in the digital space.
Yeah, lots of interactive experiments and tinkering, I'd say, just this kind of through line of having different pieces of interactive art. And, this year you had another VR experience called Disarmed. Maybe you can give a little bit more context for what that project was all about.
Yeah, so there was another project together with the same team, with Jay and Alex, and that was basically quite close to the idea, this original idea that we then had in Berlin, about that somehow that you could have the let's say the relationship between so there's like different angles, and in the broader sense, you could say it's about the relationship between our physical molecules and the real tangible body and the digital body, and how do these two relate? What does touch mean? So that in the broad sense, but then we also thought about, and that was maybe more also let's say the critical documentary way of looking at it, that we can buy these Oculus hardware and kind of cheap. They're super good, and we put them on our faces and we start engaging with whatever is in this device. And we, to a certain extent, are not super aware that we actually not really longer the only owners of the gestures and the body movements that we make, because we pay to a certain degree with our movements, just as we paid with click click, where click 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 basically showed the exploitation that you can have by just using your mouse over the screen. Is that the same case with our body movements at the moment you put on a VR glasses? And somehow you could say this project also creates a little bit of awareness in that kind of area. And we didn't want to be this time too explicit about it, because we have the feeling that also the whole surveillance narrative has been already told so often and is so at one hand exploited. So we wanted to try to become a bit more poetic, and we're also very much interested in the more, let's say, narration and the poetic, rather than making like such a specific point that we earlier often did. And that is a bit of an investigation in that area.
Yeah, and was that a part of also, like, there's a note here about a grant that you were working in terms of investigating embodiment? Was that piece a part of that grant, or was there more there?
Yeah. No, that was a piece of that grant. Yeah, exactly. Just as I mean, we got like a grant from the Stimuleringsfonds to work on that research, but also from the film funds and film fund. And I think that you're referring to that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's been 15 years since DocLab has been around, and it sounds like your own studio and your journey, and you've been engaged within both creating work and coming into the community. So I'm just curious to hear some of your reflections in terms of what how this dialogue has influenced the work that you're doing, and what you're taking from the DocLab, and how that has been influencing the type of experiments that you've been doing both in interactive and embodied media.
Yeah. First, I think we are super thankful to DocLab that they always are so generous in like trusting us and always coming up with a new project, and also always somehow find a way to give us a place or host us in one way or another. I think also over the years we have been having so much nice conversation with all kinds of people, and also indirectly later on we got a lot of new work through that. And that's nice, because the area of, or the field of interactive design, or that and also critical interactive work is not so. I mean, I think they're one of the hubs that really unite this as a group of people. And I always forget how valuable that is, because normally during the year, then we're just super busy, and you go from the one thing to the other, and that's also why I think it's so sad that this year was then half physical. I mean, it was physical, but nobody the pandemic kicked the festival kind of hard. But before that, I was always felt like, especially after a week, then I really felt that it's so nice that all these other people, they really like minds often, and we really get to know each other and have a beer together. So I think for me personally, that is like it's very much a feeling of a community somehow. Yeah, sometimes because these projects have like often a very remote audience. They're not part of, let's say, the local art scene per se. Often the audience is remote behind the computers. But what DocLab does is really create like these owners, these makers create, but also the audience really create a physical space where we can meet and interact with each other. That's like super nice.
Yeah, and as I look back on all your different pieces, there's a theme of interactivity and embodiment and the group social dynamics. And I guess a question that comes up is, for me, as I look at that, is, why interaction, or why is that compelling for you, as opposed to just, like, say, watching a film? What is it that you feel like you've been either exploring or really trying to get to the bottom of, for what's it mean to interact with either a piece of art or to be able to interact with other people?
Yeah, so I think interaction as itself was never really a goal. It was more a means, I think. And we were always very curious how this new technology, especially if you look at the beginning years, how that somehow what is this, let's say, the social potential of these things? What does it do to us? And what can be, so it was way more, it was never really about like the technology as a goal, but way more as a means to basically show something human, or investigate in what, like, human decision making or human behavior, the beauty of that, or the quirks of those things, rather than so. And I also feel that, which is maybe a bit of a sad thing, that we have been doing so many of those things successfully on the web, mainly because we also really always believe, and still do actually, in the openness of the web, and the fact that it is not like a proprietary platform. But that space, the web as a platform, I don't want to be like a lamenting old guy, but it is really declining. There's not so many people really go to a website anymore to have an experience as a platform, and that is something that I think that over the coming time we have to find a way to relate to that. And of course we did now with like making something on the Vive, on the Oculus, and also on the Vive earlier, but that was still a web piece. So that what was the question again? Like how?
Oh, just interactivity and agency, and why
exactly. So, but I can imagine that could also become at one point more performative, for example, or more into performance or theater, or maybe even film, documentary kind of film, and leave away the interactivity as a goal or as a means. But now we also, like, we are of course a bit further in our careers, we also became experts in that field, so we also know, we have so much experience that it's also like an easy and comfortable place where we are. But at the same time, we also often very discussing that and debating whether that's really the place where we want to be at this moment.
Great. As we start to wrap up, I'm just curious what you think the ultimate potential of these immersive technologies and immersive storytelling might be, and what they might be able to enable.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. I like now to give like a super smart answer, but I must say I find it hard to stay like very tech optimistic. Although maybe I'm optimistic about technology. I think it's basically, maybe it's the only thing we have. But I think the screen itself, I think maybe have a screenless focus on technology is something that I, for example, would be personally like to investigate more. But and also Luna, I think. Like the potential of technology, that it's so complicated. It's always like, on the one hand, it's like something very promising. I think, like, especially the Western world, we still think that somehow technology will find us a way out of for example, the climate crisis, or like all these kind of things. But on the other hand, we also see often that this drift in like creating like a new technology is often also creating other ways. So in the long run, I am a bit disappointed in let's say, the democratic potential or the democratization or emancipating potential that there was. I think it still is in the technology itself, but we just use it in a completely different way. And I think if I then want to somehow, if I would, let's say, enthusiasts may become enthusiasts, for example, students, then I would say there's like so much potential in like all kinds of social issues and systems that we could design as makers or reflect on, and I think we should use that way better, that potential, and not commit so quickly to all kinds of capital kind of jobs or ways of living. And of course that's easy to say, but I think that's also why it's so important that IDFA DocLab is here.
Right. Is there anything else that's left unsaid that you'd like to say to the broader immersive community or DocLab community?
No, I just want to thank Caspar, Botinka, and the whole team, everybody, for hosting us like so often, be so generous. And I also looking forward to talk with them again after the dust of the festival has been settled and think about what's coming next. That's always nice. And I want to congratulate them and sing a song for them.
Awesome. Well, Roel, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Thanks, Ken.